Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be moderating this stimulating virtual session about effective leadership during crisis at this year's Knowledge Summit. My name is Rima Najjar. I'm a TV host and former Al Arabiya business presenter. The COVID-19 crisis shaked the global economy and has upended nearly every aspect of our lives, be it personal or professional. It has forced organizations across all industries to fundamentally change the way they do business in the future. As we start to edge closer to some kind of return to normality again, it's crucial that business leaders don't lose sight of the skills that they've developed and honed during the pandemic. We are lucky to have experts in this panel to shed light upon this subject. I would like to welcome our esteemed speakers, Gabor George Burt, creative transformation expert and founder of the Slingshot Framework and contributor to best-selling Blue Ocean strategy book. John Metselaar, professor of management practice, director at the Conference Board NYC, and Dan Wong, GM of Global Innovation at MTR Corporation. Welcome, everyone. First of all, we will start with the discussion, and also we will open the floor for Q&A at the end of this discussion. First of all, I'm going to start with Dan. Dan, what's the latest on COVID-19 in Hong Kong?
Well, greetings from Hong Kong, and unfortunately, COVID has not ended here. In fact, we're going through an unprecedented fifth wave of COVID infections, and we're hovering around. Maybe, we peaked at around 60,000. We're about 30,000 cases per day. And, I think previously we had maybe about 20 cases. And so this is the most serious it's ever been in Hong Kong. It's had very broad impacts. Our own staff members are getting COVID. That hits both our back-end staff. It also hits our front-end staff, including our train drivers. And so I think, unfortunately, we're going through a very, very serious wave, the fifth wave in Hong Kong. And so we're not through it yet. Hong Kong has a very strict, what we call COVID zero policy. And so we're trying very, very hard to limit the cases. But right now, it's very taxing in terms of kind of both what we do and in terms of the whole.
Dan, it's interesting. It's interesting because the world is moving on as if the pandemic is over. And we are also here to discuss what are the steps and necessary steps to move post-crisis. Yet again, we are talking about restrictions in Shenzhen, Hong Kong. Do you think, what have we learned? Can we coexist with this virus?
I think the answer has to be we need to. I think many people will agree that COVID is not going away. And so at some point, we're living with it and we'll need to find a way. And different places have chosen different strategies. So I think it's part of business now. It's part of what we need to think about as business owners, as executives within corporations. And I think it's really hit a company like MTR very, very heavily. I think with COVID for the very first time, and we've been operating over 4 decades. The year 2020 was the very first year MTR ever lost money. Just because of systematic reduction in ridership. And so I think that the broad impact is very, very large. And so it's had very, very broad impact to all aspects of our business, both here in Hong Kong and globally.
Let me clarify. You joined MTR in 2019. That's correct. So basically 1 year before this crisis began. So what changed? What did you have to do?
Almost everything has changed. Travel patterns have changed. Hong Kong is known as a global hub of transportation, and every day, this is pre-COVID, every day we'll have about 5 to 6 million rides a day, and we have business outside of Hong Kong. We have lots of ridership across the border into mainland China, into the Greater Bay Area, into places like Shenzhen. Traffic between mainland China and Hong Kong has been cut off, except for freight. There are obviously no more travelers and tourists into Hong Kong. And I think with a new mode of working now, most folks, including myself, we're working from home. And so we're seeing a very fundamental change in the way that people move around the city.
Let me switch to John here. John, what have we learned about leadership during this crisis. And here, it's also important to mention the zero tolerance that Dan talked about in some countries, like in China and Hong Kong, and curbing this virus, having zero tolerance in terms of vaccination, wearing masks, lockdowns. Let's compare it to other countries in Europe, for example, where you ignore infringement on people's privacy. People have freedom. They choose to either vaccinate or not. They choose whether they want to wear masks or not. So how important is it during a crisis like this to actually implement and enforce harsh decisions in order to curb such a virus, and maybe do also legal actions?
Well, I guess we all have our personal point of view around what's right and what's wrong in this crisis. But maybe let me ladder it up to more conceptual perspective, which is, I mean, when I was at P&G, one of the CEOs at some point said the only constant is change, and I think that's what we're seeing here today. Because when I heard Dan talk, it's interesting because indeed in Europe, as you started saying, we've sort of moved on. And at the Conference Board, which is where I work, I'm the head of the Economy, Strategy, and Finance Center for Europe. We are now in the next crisis. We just launched a new geopolitical hub as part of our website, and we're working very hard to go and report on the implications of the Ukraine-Russia issue. So we're living in this what I call a VUCA on steroids world. I'm sure many in the audience know the word VUCA or the word VUCA: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. When I started in my new world as professor, I always started with shaping that term as the world that we live in. This was 6 years ago. That was before COVID. That was before the war that's going on right now. We have to learn to be agile when it comes to leadership. The word agility, the word courage, and the words boldness, these are coming to mind in terms of how we have to deal with the organization. And I guess that leads me to other things like, we need to go and take that and empower the organization. But I think I don't want to take up too much time at the start. I'm sure we're going to get into that in the balance of the conversation.
John, is playing it safe during any crisis a short-sighted decision for a leader?
Sorry, say that again? There was a crack on the line.
Playing it safe. Is it a short-sighted decision coming from a leader?
I did not hear the first word.
Playing it safe. Is playing it safe?
Playing it safe?
Yes.
You cannot play it safe. No, you have to take risk. I mean, you'd have to take risk, obviously, and that's the boldness in what I just said, and also courage. It's interesting because I'm sure many in the audience know that the kanji, Chinese, Japanese symbol for crisis is danger and opportunity. And so you have to go and face both as a leader. And when I talk to, the Conference Board, we talk to many senior leaders. And I remember one of my advisory boards, somebody said, we're living in a K-shaped recovery. And I go, like, I heard about a V-shaped recovery and a W-shaped recovery, but a K-shaped recovery is a K-shaped recovery. Well, the K-shaped recovery is you're either at the bottom leg of the K and you get into the tar pit, or you take the initiative and you get to the top of the K and you use it as a springboard. And that's what separates good leaders and strong companies today from those that are in trouble. If you see the opportunity and you invest, take a company like Cercle. I'm not sure if anybody knows Cercle. Cercle is a French company, even in a difficult industry. They were in the music entertainment industry. They organized concerts and performances. And so, of course, their business shut down. What did they do? Did they go and sit home and cry? No, they said, we're going to do something very different. They started to organize concerts in beautiful places in the world. The Pyramid of Giza, the Salt Lakes in Bolivia, somewhere in Paris, I think, at some point. And they started to go, and they have now millions of views on YouTube, and they started to sell posters of these places with records. And they're flying. So that's the spirit that leaders need to exhibit in this world where, just get used to change. Then the cycles are getting shorter and shorter and shorter, as I just indicated. The next crisis is already around the corner.
Let's talk with Gabor about what have changed in the culture of an organization in this crisis. Also, were there enough investments in innovation, in your opinion, or the focus was more on short-term issues? Also, should a company now have a hybrid approach rather than traditional models in order to recognize benefits of recurring revenues?
Yeah, those are great questions. And Let me also kind of echo what Dan and John has said in terms of one of my favorite quotes is by Paul Romer, a Nobel Prize winning economist, who said that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, right? So it's, again, it's about our mindset. And studies show, for example, a recent one in January of 3,000 CEOs, that 75% of them think that they will lose their jobs in the short term because of the tremendous change and the new requirements on leadership. And 94% of them think that within 3 years, their whole business model will be disrupted. So that's the kind of profound change that we're looking at. And I think that one of the things we need to realize is that not only is change constant, but crisis is just an extreme form of change and disruption. So we should get used to the idea that even though we don't know when it's coming or what the form of it will be, that there will be always at certain intervals crises, and we want to get good at managing that. And so to your question, yeah, everything is in terms of corporate culture has to embrace this notion of understanding how to navigate during unpredictable times. And the reason that that leadership needs to be completely different is that previously it was about control and stability. Now it's about flexibility and adaptability. So that is the direction that we want to go. And when you talk about resources and investments, one of the things that I really kind of bring to organizations I work with is to take advantage of what I call the innovation shortcut. And the innovation shortcut is combining already existing resources that unlock new value. So instead of trying to get new resources, which in a period of crisis is difficult, you look and see what is out there, either within your company or outside of your company, like the example John mentioned about this French music entertainment company. They took advantage of existing technology to reinvent their delivery platform, right? So I think that's a great example of the fact that you can do more with less and take advantage of the innovation shortcut. But I'll kind of finish up answering your question by citing a parable, which I think is a great way to kind of visualize the options that we have. And this is a short kind of story about 3 tourists on a safari in Africa. And the 3 tourists are walking along, and all of a sudden, this ferocious lion jumps out in front of them and facing them and showing its fangs and roaring and ready to pounce. Its intentions are very clear. So in response, the first tourist just stops dead in his tracks and is terrified by fear, unable to move. The second tourist, as soon as he realizes what's going on, starts to take off any extra equipment. So takes off his sweater, throws away his tool belt, his machete, his mobile phone, his water bottle. The third tourist is just standing there with her hands in her pocket, just assessing the situation. After a couple more seconds, the first tourist, still frozen, out of the corner of his eye, sees what the second is doing and yells, "You're crazy. You know, there's nothing you can do. You can't get rid of enough things to be able to outrun the lion." And the second tourist says, "I know. It's not the lion I have to outrun. It's one of the two of you," right? And the third tourist, after a couple more seconds, takes her hand out of her pocket, claps her hands, and the noise scares away the lion. So in many ways, the way that we respond to extreme crises like the pandemic is illustrated by these 3 tourists. So the first type of organization is one that is completely unprepared, right? It's completely exposed to all the dangers of a new situation and will have very difficult time to get past it. The second one is focused only on what? On short-term survival, so that he's getting rid of all his resources just to be able to not be the one that would be caught or eaten by the lion. And the third tourist is the one that exemplifies our wonderful ability to engage this great resource, our creativity, our imagination, and think of something unusual, unexpected as a solution that puts us in control and allows us to take advantage and turn crisis into opportunity.
So here, let me reiterate. So basically, crisis is about seizing opportunities and also make use of innovation. We're also going to be talking about the make use of technology in the third part of this discussion. Let's talk now about how to build a post-pandemic resilient institutions. Although now we're really saying that COVID is not really behind us. There's still a pandemic going on in this world. I'm going to speak with Dan now. Dan, how is the road to recovery looking to you?
Yeah, I think that's what's on everybody's mind, especially now.
Yeah.
I think everybody's getting prepared. And I really agree with what both John and Gabor said, which is kind of the response is really in the mindset. And while we've heard the term resilience for many years within the business circles, I think recently, I think is the most, I've heard this word the most, how to be resilient. And I think what that means, and I think, for example, what we are doing with an MTR is, how do we become resilient? And it's a bit of a mindset change, right? And I'll explain why that is. It's easy to say the word, but if you look at MTR, lots of times, your success is based on very, very good standard operating procedures. With MTR, we're an operating company. And so we pride ourselves on 99.9% on time arrivals and stations. We at the peak of our travel, the headway, in other words, the time between trains is less than 2 minutes. And you cannot do that without very, very precise, very good operating procedures. And what we've seen is in this pandemic, everything's been blown to the side. You cannot predict. You cannot predict what will happen the next day. And suddenly something changes. And what that really means, resilience, then, is that now you have to learn to think differently. How do you not insist on going with your standard SOPs? And actually, how do you start thinking about ways you deal with it? And I think I think companies like ourselves, and this is, I think, the same for all companies, it's really challenged us to be much more agile and resilient in how we respond. And so a lot of what we now talk about is how do we become more resilient to face these changes. And as John said earlier, the only constant is change. However, I don't think we've seen this level of change, actually, especially from MTR perspective, in these past 2 years, where it's really hitting us from all angles. It's hitting all of our core businesses in Hong Kong because we run transport. We also run real estate. We run malls. It's all been hit. All of our global operations, and we run operations in Europe in places like Stockholm and London. We're in Australia. In some places, the transport has been shut down. And so how do you start dealing with all these different challenges that are hitting us from all these different angles? So it's quite unprecedented. And I think really the core is really the mentality. How do you take on this challenge? Right? How do you become not the person that Gabor mentioned, where you're just frozen by fear? And how do you start taking action? And how do you, maybe to the point that John made, how do you get on the right side of the curve of the K-shaped recovery? How do you start getting onto this upside?
Let's speak with John about the new world of work now. How should organizations be evaluating their future orientation, given the new world of work? So what is now the new normal for businesses? For example, now we're meeting through Zoom. This is a virtual summit we are doing. Zoom trend has picked up heavily 2 years ago, since the start of this pandemic. Do you think companies now realize a new list of unnecessary expenses? And will this trend stay with us in the future now?
Yeah, I think if you're on the top of the K, yes. If you're at the bottom, no. So here's the one thing that I'll tell you is that what worked for you in the past is not going to work for you today, and it's definitely not going to work for you in the future. Open yourself up and break through your operating systems, challenge your business models. That's what I would say. And I start actually from strategy, and we'll move to leadership again later, I guess, as well. Strategy definition, and this is wonderful to be a professor because I don't need to execute, I can think about it and talk about it. Strategy definition is a plan of action to achieve a long-term goal or aim, right? That's the definition of strategy. Well, how long-term can you be today? And what plan can you actually design that actually lasts longer than 6 months or even 3 months or even 3 weeks these days? So you got to go and put strategy on its head. You got to go and be much more agile in your strategy development work. And I was interested because yesterday for the conference board, I had a very nice gentleman called Ed Morrison, and I interviewed him on his new book, which was called Strategic Doing. Leaders need to learn to go and look at strategy more as an action rather than as an intellectual planning exercise. And so create hypotheses on which you can, and this back to Gabor's point, on which you can then let your organization experiment. You got to do things to learn what to do.
Okay, John, I want to ask you a question.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Sorry for interruption. Should a leader then allocate like a few hours per week to envision the long-term goal and vision for the organization? Should he have like 2-3 hours per week dedicated for strategies and so on?
Well, be careful of spending too much time on the long term, as I just said. I think it's more important that you go and invest in your organization. You go and engage the younger people in your organization, to go and have them drive the imagination, as Gabor said, the creativity. And your role as a leader becomes getting in touch with your purpose. From your purpose flows your defining your where to play arenas, your where to play choices that provide the sandboxes for your organization to experiment in, to learn in, create a culture of learning, a culture of curiosity. And that's how you gradually move forward, and you can then react to new things, new developments that will be happening inevitably to you on the road in the years ahead.
Okay, John, if we're using virtual technology and it's going to stay with us in the future, we're going to still be using Zoom, for example. How can we compare leading virtually with leading face to face and having this physical interaction with employees? Doesn't it compromise leadership?
Yeah, well, I would put compromise is not the right word. I think it challenges leadership. I always say leadership is easy with the wind in the back, but when the storm is in the front, that's what separates good leaders from bad leaders. Leaders need to go out of their way in this world where, as you said, the physical contact is just not possible, or less possible. So you need to spend even more time to go and be with your people, support your people, trust your people, empower your people, so that they are fully part of creating that future of your company, because the world is so complex that the old autocratic leader who knew exactly what to do and tell everybody what to do and everybody would follow, that whole notion is out of the window. It's impossible. Cannot exist. Well, it can exist, but you're going to be at the bottom like a decay.
Okay, Gabor, I'm going to ask you, in order to build a better future, how can we shift from defensive measures, short-term goals, to a sustainable, inclusive growth agenda and more preventive measures? Here, when we talk here about defensive, being on the defensive, for example, lockdown was being on the defensive. Preventive vaccinations are being more preventive. It's not a cure, it's a preventive measure. So in terms of an organization and organizational culture, how can we do that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's and again, let me build on what Dan and John were talking about. So firstly, I think, Dan, you asked him about this word resilience, and he talked about how MTR, it was fascinating to hear him talk about their operational challenges. And I think one of the ways to really embrace change and look ahead is not so much stop at resilience. I mean, resilience is absolutely your first line of defense, right? Because you have to be able to stay in operation in order to have a future. But to open up your mindset to what I call reimagining boundaries, right? Because resilience by definition means that you are going to go through and be able to handle change. It's very different to then think about being one of the change makers, one of the future shapers. And so what I try to do with organizations I work with is to put them in that mind space beyond resilience, which is about reimagining boundaries. There's this wonderful old Southern saying from the US that says, you can't see the label if you're inside the jar, right? So that companies, no matter how successful, accept certain conditions, traditions, definitions about their business, which they operate within. And a crisis is a perfect moment to really push you beyond that. And so when we talk about, John said, and I completely agree, that how can you think long term when you don't know what will happen tomorrow? So the way that I get into being more of a future shaper is ask a seemingly very simple question, which is, what business are you in? Right? And most companies answer that very narrowly, talking about operationally what they do, what they make, what service they provide. But the key to that is really to expand that definition. So for example, Nintendo makes video games, but they define their business as making people smile. Subic, which is a big Saudi company, one of the biggest petrochemical companies in the world, defines its business as chemistry that matters, right? And one more example, Zumba. I just talked recently with the former CMO of Zumba, which became the largest fitness platform in the world, defined its business as unlocking joy. And when you do that, and when you expand the definition of your business, that's when you get into the space of understanding how else to deliver on those basic definitions. How do you deliver joy? How do you make chemistry part of people's lives post-pandemic? Or how do you make people smile, even though our world is very different if you're a Nintendo? And by doing that, that mental exercise and setting up a culture around your pursuit of those more core values and desires allows that sort of flexibility and for you to reinvent yourself all over again continuously. So I think that's.
Do you think there's humor has an importance in this? Humor, empathy. It seems like you're talking about having some humor, having some empathy as well.
I am a huge fan of humor. I'm glad you answered. You asked me that, because here's the connection, right? So strategy, which John also talked about. I think your mission as an organization is to have smart strategy and to have your organization be directed towards continuous relevance and even indispensability. So that to me is like the navigation of a vehicle, right? The steering wheel, that's strategy. But for you to get your vehicle moving in that direction, you need some sort of propulsion, and that's your engine, that's your motor, which you can say is electric, right? And to me, that's innovation. And that engine needs some sort of mechanism to go, whether it's fuel or electricity. And to me, that's creativity. And one of the greatest manifestations of creativity is humor, right? So where humor is allowed to exist in organizations, you see that directly linked with a culture of creativity. And that's what drives—
And productivity, maybe. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's what drives your ability to have ongoing smart strategy in a period of continuous change. So yeah, I'm glad you asked.
Let me shift to Dan now. Dan, okay, I have two questions for you now. We were talking just now about creativity and productivity. Since we're talking about digitization, remote work, did it affect productivity in your opinion? That's a personal opinion maybe. And second of all, I want to ask you how digitization kept society and businesses afloat during the pandemic. So when we talk now about digitization, we're talking about digital solutions like the telehealth doctor visits instead of doing physical visits. We're talking about platformication, fitness industry. I can go and do yoga on my TV, on my big screen. E-commerce, it shoot it up. Digital health solutions, we talked about it. Remote work, digital content consumption. For example, we saw a huge jump in the subscribers of Netflix. So again, to wrap it up, how did digitization help? And can we be productive in remote work?
Yeah, I think these are all very interesting questions. I'll take it piece by piece. I think I think whether it's MTR or other companies, I think nobody has seen this surge of digitization just because of the need to do it. MTR is no difference. I think within MTR, this whole use of digitization for our remote working, it's really a culture change. When I joined MTR 2 years ago, everybody's expected to work from the office. Many people don't even have laptops. So actually you have to be at work, right? And so when the pandemic hit and everybody's working from home, I think that caused us to introduce lots of these new tools. And I think kind of these tools, our experience has been, it's really two parts to it. On the one hand, you can say it's quite effective because it's very efficient, right? You can very quickly, without traveling in between locations, collaborate and talk about something. It's very efficient. So I think from that perspective, we're seeing some good areas. And people have said, well, quite surprising, even for MTR, I think, who has not used a lot of remote working before, I think we were also a bit surprised. Actually, our productivity did not drop that much. So therefore, I think there's a feeling that maybe in the future, even without a pandemic, we'll be doing more remote working. On the other side, I think we are seeing maybe more of a negative impact in the sense that I think there's a lot of solutions and creativity that happens when you're around the water cooler, for example. When you're in a Zoom meeting, the Zoom meeting has a particular content and topic. And there's not a lot of time sometimes to chit chat afterwards and gather around the water cooler. And I think that's where a lot of creativity, lots of things happen. I think there's a lot of parts about work, not just about completing the project, but kind of your connection with your fellow workers, right?
True.
I think that's the piece.
Going to the cafeteria, eating with your colleagues, for example, seeing someone in the elevator, saying, hi, how are you?
It makes a big difference. And I want to share a little bit of my personal experience as well, because I joined MTR at a very interesting time. As you notice, I joined MTR in 2019. 2 months after that, COVID hit. And so actually my first meeting with some colleagues is with their mask on. So I'm trying to meet new people, but everybody has their mask on. And it's sometimes hard, right? And I think at the same time, I was building a whole new team within MTR, and I was interviewing people I've never met before. And we formed a team. And so part of it a little bit kind of, and I think this goes more broadly, not just to my team, but just in general, kind of efficiency and productivity. There's also part of that is how close is a team? And so, we've tried to do things like, nobody sees each other physically. And so, we start doing virtual happy hours, which is a little bit silly, but we kind of are all on, we don't actually use Zoom. We use something else. It's called virtual chat, right? So you're kind of in a room and everybody's in their own house and we're drinking beer and we're just talking, right? And so I think I think there are new approaches now to kind of working remotely. But I think net the judgment here is that it is an effective tool. It doesn't solve everything. And it's so interesting in terms of the mindset change, because again, when I first joined MTR, nobody works remotely. And actually there was a period of time, even before this last wave, where we're back in the office. We have meetings, so you're in the office physically, but you actually don't go to the meeting room. So there's actually a meeting room been booked, but you're sitting at your office and everybody just dials in. They don't bother walking upstairs or walking next door to the meeting room because it's easier to do that, at your table. Of course, that has its pros and cons. So that's a little bit kind of to your first question around what is it like to be remote working, but no question, we're going to be using both tools as we go forward. In terms of the broader topic of, well, then how do we then start thinking about using technology, for example, to kind of, respond, resilient within this environment?
I mean, Dan, very simply, could you imagine this pandemic and crisis without GPS, without Bluetooth, without Internet of Things? What would have happened?
Hard to imagine. And I think, fortunately, our investments in those years early on, and this is pre-pandemic, has really helped now. And so I think one of the good things about this is that now we had some earlier investments here. It's really allowed us to speed that up. Lots of let's say the technology pilots we did before is really coming to work for us now. For example, before pandemic, we actually invested in robotics for cleaning and disinfection. This is before the pandemic. This is quite early. But once it hit, because we did that, we were able to move fairly quickly. And so one area that we're using technology now is in the area of robotics in terms of disinfection in our trains, in our stations. And what's very interesting here is we noticed that the use case is very different, actually. We can't really use commercially available standard robots and disinfection. And so we ended up doing a joint venture. We did a joint venture with a company that has expertise in robotics, but also expertise in biochemicals, actually. So nobody would ever imagine a company like an MTR getting involved in areas like robotics and areas like biochemicals to really make sure that our transport system is safe for the public. Also, it's safe for our own employees. And so we've been deploying lots of new technologies in this way, in a way that I think maybe 2 years ago, we would never think we would deploy it so quickly.
John, there are two questions from the audience. I'm going to ask you the first question. And if anyone can answer it, actually. Okay, someone is asking, there are challenges for medium and small businesses affected by pandemics, which is true. There are pros and cons. How can they be balanced to benefit from these businesses to contribute to the self-sufficiency in some products and services at the local level of countries?
Okay, that's a difficult question to grasp. Maybe let me try this and tap into what Dan was just saying around how we wanted to go and tap into robotics, but didn't have the capability himself and reached out to others to go and partner. We are entering a world of, and we have already entered before the pandemic, but it's only accelerating, of ecosystems. We have to go and address the wicked problems / opportunities that we have in the world by connecting with others, by collaborating with other companies, so that you can go and create not only products or services anymore, but solutions. Consumers need solutions. By the way, the world needs solutions, right? This is about PPP, people, planet, profit. So for small and for smaller and mid-sized companies, there's tons of opportunities to go and reach out, connect, be part of ecosystems. Go and scrounge around and see where you can play, where you can add, where you can make a difference. And that may be very different from one ecosystem. The role you play in one ecosystem can be very different from the role you play in another. But just go out and connect. That's the absolute critical. At P&G, we invented. We didn't invent open innovation. We're one of the front runners on open innovation. And one of the reasons why we're so good at this is that we didn't talk like everybody else about open innovation. We called it connect and develop. Connect and develop. And that was a brilliant move by our leadership at the time, because it is action. It is about action. Don't think that the solutions are out there readily for you to take in open innovation. No, it is go out, work in ecosystems, and together you work towards an integrated solution.
John, you spoke before about new skills needed in leadership. You spoke about being agile and spoke about being bold. Let's talk more about skills that are needed by a leader to navigate there's a crisis, because we all heard about the Great Resignation. The Great Resignation didn't only hit employees; it also hit CEOs, and we saw a lot of resignations in the first half of 2021. Yeah. It spiked. So, why are companies needing new talents to navigate the aftermath of what COVID-19 did? What happened? What went wrong? What did CEOs do wrong?
Well, I think leadership historically has been, as we just talked earlier, autocratic and driven by the intellect. Leaders today, and Gabor was already mentioning it as well, right? The role of leadership, when I teach, I always take 3 levels of leadership, right? Is the envisioning level, which is where purpose strategy, is coming in. There is the enabling to execute, roll up your sleeves and help your team forward. Don't expect, but help. First question to ask, how can I help to your project teams? And then the last leg, which is the most difficult one for many leaders, is engage and empower. How do you drive engagement in an organization? Gallup does this survey every year, and they check and they come up with this engagement index. Only 30% of your organization is engaged. That's in the US, 16% in Europe. The rest of the organization is just staring and bringing their physical body to work, but that's it. So how can you lift up that level of engagement? That becomes a priority of leaders. And that's not easy, because you don't learn the skills to deal with humans. You learn all the intellectual skills in your universities. So get in touch with your... Sorry?
It comes within you, like dealing with people. It should be something that comes naturally to you, like innate.
Yes and no. Some people are more set to and more natural to it than others. But boy, there's so much to learn in that field. And by the way, that gets me to the other side. It's not only what leaders do, but it's also who leaders are, or rather should be. And there I've created my own little framework, which I'm writing a book on right now, which is called what I call generative leadership. And that's the doing side of the 3 levels, as I said. But then also you got to go and operate with mind, which of course is true. And you've said, both Gabor and Dan have said this, right? This is about mindset. And by the way, Carol Dweck's book Mindset is a huge inspiration for many leaders right now in the world. So go and read that. Carol Dweck, Mindset. But it's not enough. You also got to go and operate with your heart and with your gut, because we are dealing with humans. Business is about humans. It's about dealing with humans. Innovation is a multifunctional team sport. It's where humans get together to move things forward, to drive that imagination that Gabor was talking about, that creativity. even in an environment as Dan pointed, which is now balanced between virtual and physical. So put your heart in it, accept your vulnerability, you're fallible, explain it to everybody. You don't need to have all the answers anymore as a leader. And then the last level is create that psychological safety in the gut where people feel that they can have the real conversations, they can go and make mistakes, they can go and come up with ideas that look crazy at first, but it could be the biggest thing. Don't forget, all science has started as science fiction. And by the way, that time span between science fiction and science is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So anyway, that's my generative leadership framework. Look for my book in the next year. It's coming out hopefully at some point.
I will buy it. Gabor, I want to ask you, there's a question from the audience. It says, does digitization reduce the happiness level of people? Because you were talking about humor, and I thought this question should go to you.
What a great question, because that really is something that I think about and talk about. So a lot of companies over the last 10 years or so were obsessed with digitalization and digital transformation, right? That was the mantra or a big part of their strategic mission and goal. And what I have said in response to that is, I think that's misguided. So digitalization is the means to a greater goal. It's not a goal in itself. And the goal should be what I call the emotional transformation of our target audience, right? So how do we use digitalization to make our customers or our citizens or our travelers, in the case of MTR, feel more happy about their lives, feel more content, feel more delighted about their experience with us, or the way they work, the way they communicate, the way they have fun, right? It's a completely different way of looking at digitalization. So the question is absolutely right. It's not about having a life where everything is replaced by virtual experiences or where everything is automatic. So we almost have to do nothing and we can be idle, right? So even this question about, will we be working in 30 or 50 years? Will human labor no longer be a necessary component of productivity and production? And then what? And is that a life that's interesting or something that we want to aspire to? No, we want to continuously have meaning and new experiences and feel happy and content about what we do. So to me, that is a really interesting space right now, is to understand that with all the things that the pandemic is changing about fundamentally how we communicate, we work, and we live, that we can harness the power of technology and digitalization to really imagine what is the optimal way that people can pursue happiness in their lives, and to put our organization in a position to deliver on that and make digitalization part of the solution, but not the goal of what we're looking to do.
Well, I have a very interesting question, because we are more talking about the positivities of digitization and the advantages and how this pandemic actually accelerated this. But I have a very interesting question. They say, how can digitization improve the education and training sectors? Many educational institutions have been complaining about the disruption in the flow of the educational process and the loss of many normal educational opportunities. Everyone knows, everybody hated online learning. All the parents were going crazy online learning. And the kids, how difficult it is anyways to just get sometimes small kids to get them on a chair and open the laptop and learn like this. It was really challenging. And in my opinion, it didn't really work. I mean, working remotely worked, but I don't see online learning worked. So let's answer this question. How can digitization improve the education and training sectors?
Yeah, and that's also a great question. And another one of my passions is lifelong learning. So I think the answer is that, new technology is never going to replace what was before, but rather it will be integrated, right? And the best of it will be combined with the way that we have done things in the past. So what is happening now is online learning is really democratizing access to institutions and to sources of learning that wasn't accessible before. And to me, that's a huge revolution in the whole field of education. And when you combine that with the notion that we now understand that we want to be learners for life, then technology, again, not replacing in-person learning, because as you said, there's amazing value, not just in being together when you're working, but being together when you're learning. But to complement that, so there'll be a blended hybrid model, I think is really, really exciting new frontier. And leading academic institutions are talking about 60-year curriculum rather than 4-year degrees, right? So they want to establish a relationship with learners, with students who come to them at age 18 or 20 for the next 60 years of their lives, understanding that they will continuously need to reinvent themselves, to learn new skills, new passions, and they want to be the provider of that. Now, you can't do that through 60 years of continuous physical contact, but you can certainly do that through a blended model of physical and digital. And I'm curious, Dan and John, what you guys think about this?
Go ahead, John.
Well, so sorry, I don't want to go first, but then I see you stay on mute.
Yeah.
So let me
John, let me ask you something, John. John,
Okay.
businesses that have survived, okay,
Yeah.
and did well during the pandemic, what did we learn from them?
Well, I think we started. They were agile. They were adaptable. They had the courage. They took bold steps. They believed that a crisis represents opportunities. I think that summarizes the whole conversation. And then they were at the top of the K. And I see many leaders that are they see tons of opportunities in this space. I want to tap on to and maybe that leads you also to the leadership in there. The leaders in there were exactly those learners that Gabor was just talking about. Leaders need to be learners. The risk that many leaders have is that, okay, you've done things in the past that work for you. That's why you get a top job, right? Or a top job. It counts for many leaders. You don't need to be a CEO, but that you can be leading a division, you can be leading whatever. And so now you're going to tell everybody else what to do. Well, please don't. Please don't. That's the kiss of death, right? You gotta be the chief learner. You got to go and be the hardest learner in your organization, and so that's the culture that you want to drive into your organization.
Very interesting question for you, John. There's a very interesting question for you coming from the public. How can the ethical aspects be taken into consideration while finding solutions by the leaders of technology companies? I don't know why it should be of technology companies. I think in general, like how can the ethical aspect be taken into consideration while finding solutions by leaders? They specified of technology companies. I don't know why.
But I think it leads back to what we just talked earlier, right? We have to be careful that digitization is not becoming a means in its own right, and is running away from us. Digitalization or digital transformation needs to serve society, needs to serve humanity. And I think that's a huge responsibility that leaders all over the world have today. It's a big worry of mine. That we're in that, and I see, by the way, I'm struggling with a lot of ethical behaviors of people, or of leaders around me. I'm sure that for everybody, you one company comes to mind, you go like, yeah, what happened? I just watched, and I don't want to go and poo-poo any specific company. I just watched the Boeing documentary on Netflix. You mentioned Netflix. Whoa! I mean, I read about the story, but when you see the story being told in the way it did, you go like, that is not the right thing to do. And so you have to, Theranos obviously is one example. So please, leaders, all of you, I know you're most senior leaders, do the right thing. Do what's right. Do what's right for humanity into the future.
Don't you think sometimes it takes a leader to do something unethical to get things right for the company, for the benefit of the company?
Not for the long-term benefit of the company, no. No, okay. You can do shortcuts, but these are not the shortcuts that Gabor was talking about. I would say, folks, don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because also, by the way, Rima, one more thing. Okay, if you as a leader show unethical behavior, the whole organization is going to be unethical. It is.
Sometimes it's under the table, John. That's why I'm telling you.
Yeah,
sometimes
but that's what Boeing thought. Keep it under the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dan, let's get back to you, Dan. If you want to continue on what John said, that would be fine. If not, I want to ask you your opinion. I want to take it here to the region. We didn't talk about the GCC. We saw something very interesting. The GCC did a really good job curbing this virus and containing this virus compared to the Arab world and also compared to liberal democracies. Why do you think that? Is it because of digital transformation, being a smart government, having smart governments? Is it because of innovation, financial means? We didn't talk about poor countries. Poor countries, they don't have access to digital transformation, for example, and this was or came as a disadvantage to them during the pandemic.
Yeah, I don't know if it's more on the technology side, but I think there is a part of it is just what we've noticed in this pandemic is that different countries just have a different approach, a different strategy. And, for this part of the world, including here in Hong Kong, I think that the direction was COVID zero. And so they employed different types of technology tools to try to help with that. They, employ different types of approaches on the ground, whether it's kind of regulations or different types of restrictions to try to get to that goal. And, I think kind of that still remains the approach here today. So I think it's really more around that than, necessarily the technology itself.
Okay, so I think we still have 2 minutes. I think we can wrap it up. We did the Q&A. I think we did a good debate. I think everyone got what they need out of this discussion. It was really nice moderating this panel with you, Dan, with you, John, with you, Gabor. It's really an interesting subject, interesting topic, talking about the pandemic. And we sure do hope that this pandemic comes to an end soon, because yes, we are talking about how leaders should act, what skills they should have, how to move forward, but yet we are still living with this crisis, and we sure hope it ends very quickly. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rima. Great to participate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.